Hi, if you want to watch exclusive content with hot girls that you won't watch on YouTube, namely where Naruto roasts Kushina and Mikoto and many other hot girls without restrictions, then visit my Boosty channel at the link in the description.
A birthday is a special holiday for everyone. Your day. Only yours. Well, or not only. In my case, several people at once laid claim to the date of my birthday, and if I was still ready to put up with some of them, the birth of little Obito can be considered a gift to me. Then with this. Uchiha Izuna is one of the strongest warriors of our clan in the last 100 years. A master of genjutsu, ninjutsu, kenjutsu, and so on. He has been dead for a long time. He is my grandfather and he is my namesake. In principle, I have long since come to terms with the inevitable similarity of our appearance, but sharing my birthday with a dead man is doubly unpleasant when your great uncle, instead of congratulating you, sits and is sad on the veranda, indulging in memories of pre-Konoha so that you understand the scale of the catastrophe antiquity. And this happens year after year. Well, that is, the second time already. To be honest, I'm not even sure he knows how important this day is for me. The celebration mostly takes place outside, and dragging a dead man there wouldn't be the best idea. So he himself probably wouldn't have guessed, and to say it directly, I didn't dare do it before. It seemed dangerous to mention Izunuji at such a time, and there was no clear definition in my relationship with my grandfather. But now everything is different. I arrived late at my doorstep. There were many people wishing to congratulate me in both guises, and in the guise of a Haim I even had to attend a couple of events. Despite the fact that the sun was already setting and had almost disappeared behind the horizon, one could say that I was in as much of a hurry as I could. The gifts were piled up in a decent-sized heap in the hallway, and having unmistakably sensed the echoes of my grandfather's chakra on his favorite veranda, I strewed my sandals in the corners and tumbled out into the yard. Madara sat with an extremely absent look, although I knew for sure that he had not missed my appearance. He simply ignored me. I sighed. Starting a conversation with the usual shouts seemed inappropriate to me, so I quietly sat down next to him. Grandfather turned an unreadable gaze to me, as if noting that he had kind of noticed me. But that was all. Looking away, Madara took a sip of something with an unmistakable smell from a small cup and went into himself again. Well, hello, here we go. I think I even started to remember what that unreadable look could mean. Accordingly, the question arose, how much more can this go on? Dayed, I crawled up to my ancestor on my knees and, clinging to his neck with my hands, the fact that he allows me to do this means much more than it seems, I hung on him. Madara shuddered, but now I could definitely say that he was with me, and not with the ghosts of the past. 30 years have already passed, ow. And I'm 13. What? I couldn't see my grandfather's face, but the bewilderment in his voice more than made up for it. I'm 13 years old. I repeated louder and froze, waiting for a reaction. Well, I can't just say that it's my birthday, so go ahead, congratulate me already. You can do it for all 13 years at once, I don't mind. You already said that in the shelters, but Madara, when drunk, seemed to be completely unable to understand hints. Or didn't want to. Probably, even for relatives of a granddaughter and grandfather, Izunuji and I have too much in common, but it's not my fault. Today. I turned today, I said bluntly, giving in. And, just in case it still didn't get through, I clarified even more clearly, it's my birthday. The way my grandfather took a deep breath made me feel uneasy. What would he say now? Would he launch into a tirade about how he was fed up with these eternal coincidences that were driving him crazy? I rarely see this happen, but drunk Madara is much more open and sincere than sober. He could say something like that. But there was no tirade. And no long speech delivered in one breath either. Izuna, when Madara said my name, I tensed up at first. He was calling me, right? Hell, I always knew that naming children after dead people and no relatives was a bad idea. Especially when that relative was both dead and alive. Meanwhile, I was unobtrusively pulled to the floor. You know, actually, it wasn't bad for me to hang on you either. Meanwhile, Madara turned to face me and looked at me strangely. It seemed like he was remembering again, but at the same time, he was. Here. Can this be considered progress? What? I don't know if this is progress or not, but I still came for my legitimate congratulations. Although, of course, I knew that nothing would be so simple. You have no idea how much you look like your grandfather. I can, actually, but the smile on my grandfather's face seemed strange on such a day. And, if you mean that we were born on the same day, well, I just wanted you to congratulate me. At least once. And without these eternal comparisons with the underdead corpse. No, although that too, Madara hasn't looked at me so closely for a long time. Today, there is not a gram of Uchiha Azuna in my image, but it doesn't seem to affect anything. You can't hide your breed. You are very similar in appearance, in some habits, even your character is sometimes similar. With each phrase, the polite smile on my face, which appeared automatically, became more and more strained. I had not received such revelations for a long time and even somehow managed to forget how unpleasant it was. So much for your birthday, a great gift. And as for his character, it seems to me that Madara got a bit carried away. A lot. Not knowing how to react to this correctly, I didn't immediately realize what had happened. I simply missed the moment and at some point felt the hair on my head turning into a nest. Grandpa patted me on the head. Happy birthday, I looked up at my grandfather in amazement, vaguely aware that he had never had such a soft expression on his face before. And he actually congratulated me on my birthday. Azuna. But I'm not entirely sure, is it me? It's hard to be someone's shadow, and ghosts are just a sign of mental problems. But, you know, that's just the tip of the iceberg. The real fun begins when you're the ghost for those around you. I met my second day at my new age with a completely ruined mood. Today I had a nightmare, after which the only thought that remained was, of the two of us, you're the one who's dead, so why didn't they see me? Without getting out of bed, I covered my eyes with my hands and held. Yes, the main point of my dream, which for some reason was in no hurry to be erased from memory, as usual, was that no one saw me. Do you think it's funny? Not at all. After yesterday's, this dream hit the nail on the head. Of course, I'll never tell him this directly, but... Grandpa, that was the worst congratulation in my entire life. And I've been congratulated in so many ways, but no one even thought of comparing me to Izuna at that moment. Even Shijo-sama held back. Irritably tapping my bare heel on the floor, I tried to fall asleep again. I was guaranteed not to have any missions or receptions for the next 3 days, and my only desire now was to finally get some sleep. But the blurry image of Izuna just wouldn't disappear from my consciousness, as luck would have it, replacing it with my own facial features every now and then. In such circumstances, whether you like it or not, you have to get up. Washing my face with icy cold water somewhat drove away the unpleasant images from the dream, but my mood did not improve much. This was supposed to be a relaxing day, but... TCH, it's going to be hard to comb my hair now, I noted with displeasure, brushing the wet strands away from my face with my fingers. Even if my mood is shit, Haim still has to look pretty. My daily list of procedures includes a lot: masks, ointments, basic rules of personal hygiene. On missions I have to neglect this, so while I'm in Konoha I have to make up for it. The gloomy face reflected in the mirror made me want to crack. Today, I was annoyed by everything that reminded me of my grandfather, and I was no exception. But in addition to emotions, there was common sense, so instead of smashing the mirror to pieces, I stubbornly continued to rub the cream into my face. With a fair amount of aggression. Very similar in appearance. I don't deny that it's true, but you know, Madara-ji, we've known each other long enough that you can start to see me in me. Izuna and I are far from being twins, or even identical twins. And with each passing year, our similarity melts away before our eyes. I am a girl, after all. My face changes, my build too. But you don't realize it. I can't believe that my grandfather could be so handsome. Some habits. Oh yeah, I can just picture the cool and arrogant. That's the impression I got from the portraits I've seen. Izuna squealing and running into the back of the brutal and equally cool Grandp, and then hanging on him the whole way. Now the Senju would laugh. Haha. I'm laughing too. Even the character is sometimes similar. Really? Where? Where? In what place? And how could anyone even guess to compare me to him on our common birthday? I got mad, threw the comb on the floor and went towards the Resident Evil, as I called the room where Madara usually made his evil plans, where I could feel my grandfather's chakra. That's it. I can't stand this bullying anymore. I'll go and tell him everything right now. I was angry, the bruises under my eyes, standing out like blue circles on my white, toadstool-like, oh, I apologize, aristocratically pale, skin, they wouldn't let me lie. I was furious, the barely holding partition, which I opened with a wild roar, will confirm. I was ready to start screaming the moment I saw my grandfather looking through me at his fucking ghosts. Except. The words caught in my throat when instead of my grandfather poring over jutsu scrolls, I saw him bent over a piece of paper. Over my portrait. Only it didn't look like he realized it was me on it. A quiet wheeze escaped from my chest. I wanted to growl and cry. To remind him that Tsunade doesn't smile in portraits. And I already opened my mouth to say it, but... Did something happen? Madara calmly turned his gaze to me, standing on the threshold, which suddenly became so difficult to cross. My throat felt so dry that it was hard to speak. But it was all my imagination. And I also realized that, and I missed you. The solution to explain my appearance came quickly. In the blink of an eye, I was next to my grandfather and hung on him. Madara staggered, but stood his ground, which saved us from another sweary wash. There was ink behind him, and such stains don't wash out without swearing. And with her, to be honest, it wasn't so good either. That's great, but, Grandpa hissed and at the last moment removed one of the relatively full inkwells from my legs, which I had a habit of swinging. And if anyone thinks that after this just a little bit more I stopped, then they are deeply mistaken. My legs still continued to swing and threatened to knock down everything that could. Finally, the goal was achieved and 2 inkwells fell on the sheet of paper Grandpa dropped. Damn you! Izuna! Grandpa cursed and, with a jerk, pushed me aside, began to save his notes. The portrait sheet was already completely ruined. I smiled. This appeal was definitely addressed to me, and not to my brother's ghost. Where is my ovation? Applause? Maybe it's just a trifle compared to what I had planned. Instead of a major debriefing, just ink spilled on my own portrait. Well, maybe it's not what I wanted. This portrait was a gift. Maybe, but I just can't let him realize that he has completely forgotten the face of his dear brother. It's true, isn't it? I can't. I shouldn't. Oh, Grandpa, there's some dirty piece of paper, I babbled in a completely innocent tone, pointing my finger at the piece of paper. I'm damn sorry for the effort Aiko-san put in, but it's easier for me to destroy my own image in a world where there is no camera than to endure this. Telling me about a slight resemblance is one thing, but hovering over my portrait, remembering my brother, is quite another. Tessin, Madara said this in a tone creaking with suppressed emotions. Emotions, or a desire to curse? Well, yes, in addition to that ill-fated drawing. There were a hell of a lot of very important papers here. Which I can't even look at. Oh, yeah? I answered in the same innocent voice as before, but this time with a noticeable amount of satisfaction. The fact that I didn't directly say that he had confused us and that I hadn't made a scene didn't mean that I wouldn't give Grandpa hints about what exactly it was about him that I didn't like. The hell, I'd tolerate that without a murmur. What does this all mean? Madara's heroic attempts to maintain a calm tone, while simultaneously trying to wipe away the drops of ink that had gotten onto some of the scrolls, made me smile even wider. Isn't it charming? Any other normal person would have freaked out or raised their voice a long time ago, but he is still holding on. What are you talking about? I answered with a question, innocently batting my eyelashes and maintaining a carefree tone. His patience would probably soon run out, but he should at least know that there was some kind of problem, right? We saw each other no later than yesterday, and you burst in and declare that you miss me. Isn't that too strange? Grandpa narrowed his eyes suspiciously. Huh? Shouldn't he be angry? What the? The first time you declared that you were getting married. The second time, that you were getting married. And now what? Are you trying to marry someone? Haha. I jumped up, offended. What kind of hints are these? And anyway, the joke didn't go over well. I'm still worried about it. You're a bastard for reminding me of it. I told you I just missed you. Is that not a significant enough reason? Parallel to these words, I moved closer to my grandfather and, comfortably placing my chin on his shoulder, sadly looked into his eyes. Well, go ahead, be imbued with this languid gaze. If you apologize, I might even forgive you. I definitely will. Not normal people, he said, as if cutting it off. All the feigned, well, not quite, sadness immediately floated off my face. The real dissatisfied expression was revealed. What do you mean, normal people? Oh, my. Are you saying that I'm abnormal? Now the tone was even sadder than before. And melancholy, and drama, and suffering. Because there's no point in talking about me as if everything is so. I mean, of course, I know that I'm a little out of the ordinary, but this is too much. Out of a feeling of special vindictiveness, I reached for a hug again and, as if accidentally hit Madarina's lump superscript 1 on her chest with my elbow. I don't know where he got it, half of his chest. But the blow must have been painful, and I'm not going to apologize. Or pretend that I even noticed it. Madara twitched, seemed to even choke, glared at me angrily, but said nothing, apparently deciding that it wasn't worth it. Ahaha. That's exactly why I did it. I know that nothing will happen to me for this. Of course, this doesn't always work, but over the entire time we've known each other, I've learned to understand when it's possible and when it's not. I want to say that you're nuts. Grandpa answered fiercely, abruptly throwing me off of him. I fell painfully on my butt and blinked in surprise. That was definitely unexpected. Madara is kind of nervous, run for a rag and. I immediately jumped up and rushed to carry out the order. It was a little offensive. Crazy, but honest. Only usually Grandpa kept his honesty in check and, unlike me, was not very rude to me, he tolerated. And now, he lost it. Why all of a sudden? I thought upset, and then, unsuccessfully stepped on something liquid and flew up into the air with my feet. Bang! Watch out, don't step on the puddle, Madara finished, already tiredly covering his eyes with his palm. Perhaps I should have listened to him to the end. There was a ringing silence, during which my grandfather stared at me, spread out in the star pose. After a second of staring, he said, "It's better to throw away your clothes right away." Yeah, I agreed, staring at the ceiling with a confused look. The stars are spinning, spinning. And I still don't understand how my debriefing manages to end with only flights. Mine. If you think about it, Madara. This time I called him by his name again, but I don't care. I won't correct myself this time, it's hard to get used to new addresses so quickly. Cammy, how my head hurts, and my ass. And my heel. What? Grandpa seemed to be very wary of something in my tone. He approached me, holding out his hand, obviously to help me stand up if necessary. I think I could really use some help, I was pretty banged up. But that's not the only thing. Do I look like my grandfather now? Like a Tsunade? I can't live in his shadow forever. I need to know that at least in situations like this I. Did you hit your head or something? Madara frowned and quickly reached out to check my turnip. Immediately with some kind of medical equipment. Apparently, he decided that there really was a problem with his head, although, you know, they are actually similar. That one also sometimes babbled wild nonsense when he was wounded. No, with my heel, I answered automatically, demonstratively lifting my leg with that very heel. It was with this heel that I stepped into the fateful ink. And then I heard the answer. And, taking a deep breath. What the hell is this? Madara looked surprised, wary and tired of my endless antics. I don't know anything, this time it's his fault. After all, even then, Grandpa said that. This is a Tsunade. I answered proudly, attaching the 10th portrait of my grandfather to the wall. I had to work hard to copy and find ready-made images, but if everything goes as it should, the result will justify the effort. Now that my namesake ancestor stands next to me, the difference should be obvious. Excellent. But why hang his portraits all over the house? I even find them, Madara pointed at the piece of paper I had just pasted to the wall. In my office. It would be interesting to hear how you explain this. Well, for me, The main thing is that he just sees me next to Tsunade, and how I explain it is not so important. You see, I began to speak with inspiration, putting my hand to my heart and ignoring my grandfather's strange looks. I'm his fan. Actually, no. Not a chance. I like Tsunade because his face, so imprinted on me, often saved my life, but there are too many problems with it to be a real fan. In fact, I even hate him a little, because it's like he's winning Madara's attention from me, even if he's long dead. A fan? Grandpa raised an eyebrow expressively, masterfully showing with his whole appearance how he felt about my statement. His gaze screamed at me, I don't believe it. Yeah. But I'm not used to giving up, and I really needed a reason to hang these portraits everywhere. Of course, formally this is my home. I'm free to do whatever I want with it. But only formally. In reality, we still haven't decided on this, and therefore I have no right to do whatever I want. And so, the perfect cover. Will Madara be very against me being a fan of his adored brother? I don't think so. I recently read about him, he's so cool. In my humble opinion, Grandpa is still hundreds of times cooler than the sofa. But it's not his portraits that I need to hang all over the house. I drawled, having the most insidious plans. And Grandpa? What do you want? Madara clearly sensed a catch, but he couldn't say what exactly it was. Oh well, he'll find out now. There are so few images of Tsunade in the archive. I cast a touching glance from under my brows and meekly blinked my eyelashes. Can you show me him in Genjutsu? He is your brother Dash. Please. Please. I begged as hard as I could, but despite that, this whole circus wasn't for me. If he showed me Genjutsu, he'd have to introduce Tsunade in detail. Returning to reality, he'd look at me with fresh eyes and immediately understand that we're not that similar. And the portraits would reinforce the effect. That's it. Aren't I a genius, huh? Huh? Why did you suddenly? Madara muttered under his breath, and then glanced at me. I made the cutest face I could. Grandpa sighed. Okay. Hooray. I rejoiced, jumping up and down. Okay, but I have a condition, he broke my mood. Judging by the way he looks at the portraits. Looks like I'll have to take them off soon. That fanatical version didn't work out so well. Well, at least Grandpa agrees to Genjutsu. It's still more useful than just portraits. I sigh heavily. What? No, how offensive. I spent so much time copying these portraits. And searching for a suitable original. Tsunade, as expected, mostly hung out on the battlefield, so there are few images of him. Thank all the gods that there are any at all. No, fan paraphernalia in my office, Madara said sternly, looking at me seriously. I beamed. What, only in the office? Yes. Yes. Yee. Understood? Got it, I nodded enthusiastically. Grandpa looked at me with disbelief. Barely holding back from rolling my eyes, I cheerfully said, no portraits in the Resident Evil. Madara's eyebrow shot up. Ouch. In your office, I correct myself quickly, but the look of my ancestor hints that we will talk about this later. The shinobi stared at me with a suspicious, yes, I understood everything, I understood. Look for a few more seconds, and then. Okay, he sighed, taking a step towards me. Everything inside me was jumping with anticipation. Ugh, even if all this was for the sake of Grandpa finally stopping comparing me to a sofa superscript too. I myself am also interested in seeing what he really looked like. Dry portraits where he doesn't even smile can tell me little about him, and yet he plays an important role in my life, despite the fact that he is dead. Madara leaned slightly, as he always did in moments when it was necessary to establish eye contact. Look into the eyes. And I looked. And the next moment, the scarlet whirlwind of the Sharingan pulled me into a colorful illusion that gave me many discoveries, but did not bring what I expected. It was evening, and several hours had passed since I had seen my grandfather in person, but I was still under the impression. According to my plan, the need to work out Tsunade's facial features in detail was supposed to make Madara see our differences, but... well, even if it had helped, now I myself felt unsure. We really did look alike. Much more than in the picture, the living sofa superscript 2 was similar in appearance to me. Or rather, I was similar to him. My original goal failed a little. Although my actions had an effect, but, great. Now Grandpa has withdrawn into himself even more, because in the genjutsu he had to show me his memories, which in this form. It's a complete failure. I only made it worse. Even though he looks at me differently now, clearly seeing more differences, but I still remind him of Tsunade. And he thinks about him even more than before. My teeth involuntarily started to bite my lips, but I stopped myself in time. Damn, I can't get rid of this habit. I can't ruin my skin. I feel sick somehow. Everything is complicated in the outside world, engagements, the imminent end of my career, secrets that have come to light, and I don't even have the right to express my nervousness. It's not enough for me, now the atmosphere in the house makes me want to get out of there. But where could I go? I feel like a bird stuck in a cage. As soon as I break out of confinement, I find myself in another, albeit more spacious, cage. Grandpa, as usual, was sitting somewhere in his abode. I had to explain this, by the way, and I was hanging in the kitchen, thinking about what to do now. Not with external problems, no. Everything has already been decided there and nothing can be changed. Only wait. The most important thing now is to bring peace back to the house. This place was my only outlet, my island where the sun always shone, and now, clouds have gathered in the sky. And my task is to disperse them. So, sofa superscript 2, why did you die so early? I thought with annoyance. A stupid question, of course, as if he wanted to die, but, still, if he were alive, everything would have been different. Even Madara would not have taken on this plan of his. Konoha, perhaps would have been founded anyway, because he and Shodai dreamed of it. But Grandpa would have been much happier. And Mom? Even Mom would probably be alive. Because who would risk it? But he's dead, I pulled myself up short. And that can't be changed. A strange thought ran across the edge of consciousness. Actually, in this world there are different rules and death. Are you completely nuts? I screamed at myself, slapping my cheeks with my palms. My face burned with pain, but I didn't care. What kind of thoughts are these? What the hell is Edo Tensei when it's still in the development stage? Oh. Ugh, no. The unavailability of technology is generally the least of the problems. You have to think of something like that, huh? And why did I even think of that? Because of a little tension in the house? Pfft. The saliva suddenly became viscous, and I felt uneasy. A shiver ran down my skin. All my experience, gleaned from otherworldly books and series, including manga about the future of this world, told me that resurrecting the dead never ends well. And the ease and naturalness of this thought made me feel creepy. I guess it's time for me to go to bed, her hand twitched nervously, brushing against the empty cups. And tomorrow, I'll deal with my family problems myself. Without any dubious methods. Thunder roared outside. A downpour began. And for several days there was still an oppressive silence in the house. I couldn't cope on my own. Commentary on and the living will not forget the dead. Superscript 1, Hashirama's face on Madara's chest, but Azuna doesn't know, or rather, doesn't remember, about it. So, have you already imagined how she wholeheartedly elbowed Shodai Hokage in the nose? And he is her idol. Superscript 2, Sofu equals grandfather. For convenience, distinguish Madara from Tsunade. Well, what do you think? How do you like this bonus? Should I continue or? The weather was foul over Konoha. It had been raining nonstop for days, and Azuna felt just like nature. Her soul was disgusting. Disgusting. Disgusting thoughts were rooted deep in her disgusting mind, pushing her to do something truly disgusting. Thunder. She better hurry before it starts pouring again. Digging in the rain. She even wanted to change her mind, because what had prompted her to do this? The bad atmosphere in the house? But everything could get better with time. But something inside her told her it would take a lot of time. More than she had. More than she could handle. Her determination came from nowhere, and no amount of rain could shake it. The shovel clanked. Izuna closed her eyes, quietly whispering an apology to anyone this prank might offend. She had been told so many times, respect the dead, and in the end. How did it even come to this? Are you s? Izuna silently looked away. Yes, she knew it herself. It was disgusting. You can't disturb the dead. It was a complete disrespect to their memory. Even Madara would probably have reacted negatively if she had mentioned it. As far as she remembered, her grandfather had planned something like that himself. He had definitely been resurrected in the future. But there was something else there was the Rinnegan. And she only had the dirty technique of the unholy resurrection. Or rather, she didn't even have it. Yes, Kira was absolutely right, but the house had been uncomfortable for several days now. Never before had Izuna found it so hard to return there. Even when she was afraid of finding the notorious shinobi there, her grandfather. Never before. In vain had she asked to show the sofa in Genjutsu. The thoughts about how much better everything would have been if he had stayed alive were becoming more and more intrusive. But if only that were the problem. Thinking about how great it would be to be able to resurrect the dead, that's one thing. That's not scary. Scary when you know how to do it. Edo Tensei definitely existed. Not an improved version, but the technique probably worked. Tobirama is dead, which means Izuna couldn't get rid of these thoughts. But she understood that having done such an act, the dirt would never be washed off. The ground, damp from long rains, gave way with difficulty. And there were some doubts whether this was the right place. In the grandfather's memories, everything looked a little different. Which is not surprising. But Uchiha continued to dig. The technique would not work without the DNA of the resurrected. Madara looked out the window with a gloomy expression. A thunderstorm was raging outside. It had been raining for the second day. It was not very convenient to move around the damp, mud-covered forest, which was probably why he stayed. That was also why, before, he usually refused her requests to stay longer. Izuna was a little worried about how the constant concealment of chakra, not complete on the territory of the mansion, but still, would affect his well-being, but outwardly, his grandfather did not show any signs that it caused him discomfort. Probably he did not. From that very day, from the very moment when she came out of the Genjutsu, his face did not leave a gloomy expression. And it was all because of her. Madara missed Izuna-ji. Her name was Izuna too, and she liked to think he was dear to her too. But she couldn't replace her grandfather. No way. The living can't compete with the dead. The shovel finally hit something solid. And judging by the sound, it wasn't rock. The coffin, the girl exhaled with excitement. The way back was getting further and further away. The work began to boil again. It was amazing that the tree was still in such relatively good condition. It was a miracle. There was very little left. The boards fell inward with a dull crack, and Izuna's breath was taken away by what she saw. Bones were terribly white among the earth and rotten wood. She felt a little sick. She was a shinobi, yes. It was strange for her to be afraid of something like this, but this was her grandfather's grave. Consider it a shrine. Madara would be angry. He would definitely be angry. Even Izuna-ji himself would probably be furious. There was no need to even talk about the person who would have to be used to perform the technique. However, at least this way, Grandpa will stop being sad. He will rage, get angry, and then he will be happy. If, of course, the technique works correctly. This was what was really scary. More than for his own safety after success. I'm sorry, Izuna said in a strangled voice, bending down to take the bone. After the Genjutsu about Madara's memories, the reproachful face of her grandfather was more clear than ever. But this is for her grandfather. So that he wouldn't be sad. And that meant she had to forget about her fears and just do it. The girl didn't particularly bother with the choice of bone, she just picked the first one that came to hand and that was it. As she climbed out of the hole she had dug, she cast another guilty glance towards the skeleton. It seemed that despite being inanimate, he saw everything. He saw and condemned. Another word escaped her lips, I'm sorry. Well, Izuna thought a little hysterically, carefully filling the hole. The view at her grandfather's grave would clearly not be the same as before. Half the job is done. All that's left is to get a victim and use the technique. It started raining again. Her hands were shaking, either from the cold or from the realization of the blasphemy of her actions. But there was nowhere else to retreat. The Sofu's grave had already been desecrated. She would never forgive herself if she chickened out after this. Yes, there was just a little bit left. Izuna raised her face to the sky. Raindrops began to wash away the dust from her tear-stained face. At least this should atone for her guilt. It should. And Madara will finally be happy, right? The unconscious body of some little-known missing nin fell to the floor with a crash. No weak cries of reason about how if nothing worked, it would be extremely difficult to explain to Madara the presence of this in the middle of their house, could convince Izuna that such rituals were better carried out in a closed area. And, preferably, not in a place from where they would have to get home from all over Konoha. Perhaps it would be much more reasonable to arrange everything somewhere deep in the forest, close to the shelters, but Uchiha did not want to wait. She would not stand another couple of days in such an atmosphere. Therefore, in the end, it was decided to carry out the ritual of resurrection of the house, in warmth, dryness, and with a supply of sedatives nearby. Her hearing, heightened by the strain, seemed to allow her to hear even the victim's heartbeat. Izuna was starting to feel sick from the excitement. It wasn't a fact that it would have been better if the technique only required a corpse, but the need to sacrifice a person who was not involved in her plans made her feel like a monster. The only consolation was the knowledge that, even if it wasn't so, she still had to kill him. He was a criminal. He chose his own fate. Although he could hardly have imagined that this would happen to him. Okay, enough of this delay, Izuna said to herself in a shaky tone. Madara was still in the house, and the fact that he hadn't come out to check what the hell was going on with their chakra source was nothing short of a miracle. Even if he wasn't a natural sensor, he still had developed Kanchijutsu, and even with suppressed chakra, a shinobi could still be sensed at a sensory level. The special scroll unrolled, rolling across the floor. The grandfather's bone in her hand burned her palm like boiling water. Or maybe it was fear that was making her hands cold. Kneeling down a couple of meters away from the victim, very close to the wall, the girl took a deep breath and began to fold the seals. Tiger. The Nukanin's breathing quickened, as if he sensed his imminent death. Delirium, of course, but lately her whole life had been delirium. No, a guilty thought slipped through her mind, he won't die. It will be worse. Losing control over his own body must be scary. Will he be conscious at that time? The scroll doesn't say. Snake. Kira made her attitude towards this idea clear. Madara has every reason to be angry, and how will she, her scaly friend, react? It doesn't concern her directly, but, unlike many other important people, she will definitely know about it. And what will happen then? Will she stop coming to her? God, and she doesn't even know whose summon she is. It will be the end. Dog. Her gaze involuntarily moved to the control seal lying nearby. Izuna didn't even want to think about it, she had had enough of what she had already done, but in case something went wrong, she had prepared this instrument of influence. However, despite her blind faith that everything would go well, he was her grandfather. Her own. God, even Madara had refused to kill her back then, although he should have done it. The girl still understood that she could react to Izunagi's sudden resurrection in any way she wanted. And aggression was not excluded. Although, in fact, if she died today, it would most likely be at Madara's hand, not the sofa's. That's what she should really be afraid of. Dragon. The last seal. Only moments remain until. Something inside was making it hard to breathe. Probably excitement. God, what is she doing? This is a forbidden technique. But it's strange to continue worrying about something like this when it's already completed. A soft pop sounded in the room. The Fuin letters began to spread in all directions. Everything inside was rumbling with fear. What if it doesn't work out? Or, on the contrary, will everything go as it should? I really wanted to run away as far as possible, hide under the blanket and pray that all this was a dream. But my body seemed to go numb, and the next moment the first, Well, more precisely, the second, if you count the fact that she didn't have a scroll with the technique as the first force majeure happened. The Nookneen sat up abruptly, coming to his senses, and his painful scream echoed throughout the entire house. Izuna almost screamed along with him from fear and surprise. The scroll didn't say that the victims would scream like they were being slaughtered. Not only Madara, but the entire block would come running here. The grandfather's chakra center trembled and slowly, even the heart, going crazy, beat as if in slow motion from horror, so that in reality everything probably happened a little faster, but inexorably began to approach the scene of action. The girl trembled in panic, feverishly shifting her gaze from the screaming victim to the door and back. What to do? He had to see the end result. And, preferably, by that moment she had already managed to talk about everything with the sofa. Everything was going somewhere wrong. Dust and ashes enveloped the Nookneen treacherously slowly, and Haim grabbed her head with her hands. They would kill her now. They would definitely kill her now. They would bury her alive in a grave. They would burn her before this fire. Both grandfathers at once. The man, suffocating under a covering of ashes and dust, almost lost his voice, but it was still heard throughout the mansion. Shut up! Izuna screamed along with him. His fate was already decided, he would die exactly like this, and he hadn't been warned about it, there was no factor of the unknown. And she? They would probably try out the whole arsenal of torture on her now. The partition was broken with a crunch. Madara entered, surrounded by an aura not far from that of death itself. And the effect of the technique ended so successfully, and in the place of the missing Nin, swaying, stood Tsunade. For a moment there was complete silence. The girl barely stifled the hysterical laughter that threatened to destroy her. Well, that's it. Here came her mortal hour. In her fantasy, her grandfather was not so scary and evil. A second, that's how long it took him to understand everything. Madara knew, and almost everyone knew, even if it was just a legend, a myth, about the second Hokage's terrifying technique that allowed him to resurrect the dead. What is this? Her grandfather's tone of voice was quiet at first, but it made the hair on her back stand on end. Izuna was no longer sure that he would appreciate her efforts later. If that happened, his assessment would definitely be negative. I'm asking you, what is this? Everything inside me sank, and the instinct for self-preservation demanded that I immediately jump out the window, but this, her tongue was barely moving from fear. Her body went numb, as if from some terrible poison, but freedom of movement immediately returned as soon as the girl met her grandfather's gaze again. And her tongue was suddenly able to give out something new. This is Tsunade. In the blink of an eye, Uchiha found herself next to her own grandfather and, hugging him, and hiding behind his back from her cousin's grandfather, she gave the climax of it all. And he will live with us. That's it. Now she'll definitely be buried. The surprise was a success. Madara didn't know whether to slap the insolent little thing right away or yell at him first. Commentary on and the dead will become alive. Shorter than the first part, but still a masterpiece, ahem. Honestly, I was tormented for a long time by the thought that I needed to write a couple more scenes here so that the size of the chapters would be approximately the same, and not with a difference of 6 pages, but in the end common sense and laziness one. The new scene is more suitable for the new chapter, and it honestly takes a long time to write. In the format of the new part, it looks better somehow. Well, how do you like the new chapter? I'm thinking about doing the focal alternately in the next part, so that there's a little bit from all the characters. There will also be a piece from Tsunade. And a heart-to-heart talk. A few revelations and flashbacks, probably. Then more monotonous days should begin, and here I'm stuck. What could happen there? Maybe you have ideas or wishes? Equals, and the living will stand against the living equals. 3 people, belonging to different generations, but outwardly suggesting their blood relationship, were sitting at a table in a cramped, as it now seemed, room that was a kitchen. The youngest of those present, and also the only girl, was nervously glancing at the older man, who was looking back at her with displeasure. The only thing missing in the room was thunder and lightning, but the opponents had one thing in common: they both periodically looked at the third guy. This guy was the reason for their silent argument. Izuna, even though he was blind now, was perfectly aware of the atmosphere. The awkward silence, the trembling in this girl's voice, the anger in the tone of this man. Only the situation itself was unclear. From Izuna's crumpled explanations, his namesake was a funny non-coincidence. He knew that he really had died. The Uchiha had not suddenly awakened a talent for healing, and he had not been saved. Many years had passed since his death, and now, for some reason, he had been resurrected by his own granddaughter. Granddaughter. The thought of it made him shudder. But the worst thing was not even that. Nissan was still alive, and this fact itself was pleasing, but he had changed a lot. And for some reason, he was also against his resurrection. How many years had passed since his death? What happened to the clan? To Miyuki? What was the situation in the world? All this was unknown, but the available data was not encouraging either. However, it was better to live like this than not to live. The only question that remained was why he had been resurrected, if Madara, the one who could do it out of affection, was categorically against it. However, asking questions seemed inappropriate. The entire room was a powder keg right now. He needed to wait until the two of them cooled down and question one of them. Normally, Izuna would have chosen Madara without hesitation. His brother always kept him informed of the situation, becoming secretive only when it came to his beloved Senju, and even then, in recent years, he had stopped hiding the content of their conversations on the battlefield. But if there was no opportunity or the changes in him turned out to be stronger than it seemed at first glance, this girl was also a good option. She was naive enough, and his resurrection was her doing. Izuna, when Madara suddenly spoke up, both he and she shuddered. The elder Izuna raised his empty eye sockets to his brother, expecting out of habit that he was being addressed specifically. But the younger Izuna saw something completely different. Her grandfather, great uncle, was looking at her with a heavy expression. Of course, she was the only one at fault in this situation. Who else could he address in such a dry tone? One thing was unclear: why was Madara so obviously, openly ignoring the sofa? She was sure that her grandfather, having cooled down, would hang around his resurrected brother, but in the end, she was the one who did not leave Izunaji's side. Dispel the technique. Shuddering as if she had been doused with water from a mountain spring, Izuna cast a sideways glance at her grandfather. Initially, this man, despite the huge number of impressions, kept a mask of composure, striking with his calm. It didn't matter that his calm reeked of falseness from a mile away. How can you remain like this when your whole world has turned upside down? Honestly, Izuna was amazed by this. But after these words, spoken in an icy, uncompromising tone, his emotionless mask collapsed. A complex range of colors appeared on his face, from which Izuna could only confidently recognize pain. The girl tried to imagine herself in his place, and she felt uneasy. However, even without all this empathy, her answer was ready. There was no way she would back down now. Yes, Madara was definitely chemistry angrier than planned, but this stage was foreseen. Now he would go crazy, but then he would cool down and probably be happy. No, Izuna definitely had no intention of maintaining this oppressive atmosphere, and, giving her answer, casually leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms over her chest. And, once again, if anyone suddenly thought they had misheard, no, I won't dispel it. Madara jumped up from the table with a bang. Oh, don't tell me he didn't expect that answer. When had she ever been completely obedient to him? I said, dispel. The room began to fill with ki, and her knees, with weakness. Izuna, frowning with annoyance, reached for the knife. Grandfather looked at this action of hers with an unreadable, but not at all worried look. Probably decided that she was going to fight him. He doesn't know her well, this knife. And I said, I won't dispel it. For her. Abruptly leaving the table, Haim did something no one expected. She plunged a knife into her thigh. For a moment, her vision went dark from the pain, but the effect was achieved. She was no longer afraid. Their argument was unfair when Madara used ki. And she was very, very much inferior to him in strength. The only chance was in a verbal battle. Somewhere deep down, or maybe not so deep down, Izuna expected that her injury would postpone this argument for later. Or that her grandfather would at least calm down, ask why she did it, and she would answer that it was all because he scared her. And he would correct himself, they would talk normally, but no way. Madara was not distracted by such little things. "Aren't you afraid of me at all?" This question was usually rhetorical. Usually she would just smile at him and say that she loved him, noting to herself that this didn't relieve her fear. But now the question sounded with an undisguised threat. "Do you know what I'll do if you don't dispel the technology right now?" Honestly? Izuna didn't know and didn't want to know. It was just offensive, so much so that her eyes began to sting, that despite everything that had happened, her grandfather was now openly threatening her. Not asking, but ordering. And this despite the fact that initially all of this had been started for his sake. Sofu, who had been listening to their conversations with a wary eye, trying to figure out what was going on, also began to stand up. His movements showed tension and readiness to start a fight at any moment. Even without his eyes, he must have been a dangerous opponent. For her. Madara simply had no one else in this world to oppose, the only person equal, and maybe even stronger, to him died before she was born. Now they did not have Hashirama Senju. Well, in any case, Izuna didn't want to reduce everything to a fight. Silently placing her hand on the sofa's shoulder, the girl pressed lightly, hinting that it would be better for him to sit now. As far as she knew, he had lost his sight not so long ago, literally a couple of days, or maybe hours, it was not known for sure, this was not written in the scrolls, before his death, which meant that Izuna had not yet gotten used to blindness. He caught the atmosphere by ear and by sensation, and 30 years had passed since his death, a mountain of changes, both in people and in the world. In general, the girl felt obliged to take care of the resurrected guy. It was difficult to call him a grandfather, until Madara cooled down and started doing it himself. "We'll sort it out ourselves now, don't worry," she whispered, laughing nervously inside at the thought that such politeness on her part was rare. But it was too awkward to talk to the Sofu in a familiar way, as she had done with her grandfather. "Madara-ji. I need to sort this out quickly," Izuna thought, turning her gaze back to her grandfather, who, unlike her, never took his angry gaze off her for a moment. "Ugh. I don't know," she answered frankly, and then continued with frank insolence, "but in any case, the worst thing that awaits me is death. And this technique does not flutter with the death of the performer." To admit out loud, even in such a situation, that Madara could kill her, was terrifying. And somehow it occurred to me at the wrong time that there are many things much worse than death. Or that death can be painful. "Do you want to make me angry, Tessin?" Grandfather's voice left a feeling as if sandpaper had been run over her skin. "I want to see you happy," Izuna answered mentally, but in reality she only snorted stubbornly, wincing from the burning pain. It must be admitted that she had acted very thoughtlessly with this knife. The pain had only helped for a while, Madara was still frightening. If so, then congratulations, you succeeded. And the grandfather, turning around, quickly left the room. But Izuna did not feel like a winner from such a capitulation of the enemy. Tears began to burn her eyes. "And nothing. It's nothing. He will understand everything later, and everything will be fine. He will cool down. He will think about everything. Understand her motives and cool down." Really? Commentary on "and the living will stand against the living." When I haven't looked at my own drafts for months, oh my, these are some twists. Izuna is so impulsive here, a knife in the thigh, brrr. And Madara is fucking tough. Well, actually, the atmosphere of the FIC obliges. Equals 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 equals, and the dead will support the living equals 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 equals. Unlock the technique. At these words, no matter how trivial it sounded, something inside snapped, leaving a nagging emptiness in its place. Madara had changed a lot over the past years, and how many had passed? 10 years? 20? He already had a granddaughter. Izuna noticed this immediately, but he had no idea how much. Until now. Being dependent on someone else's technique was scary. Uchiha didn't allow anyone to control his life, not his clan to the extent he believed, not his father, not even his own brother. He could trust his life for a while to someone he trusted, but even with that analogy, the girl who claimed to be his granddaughter, Izuna didn't know. They might be biologically related, but not morally. He felt some gratitude towards her, while even Madara had expressed his disapproval of his resurrection. The girl, whatever her goals, had brought him back to life. And Izuna wanted to live. Death doesn't scare a shinobi, it can be accepted, but in truth, at that moment when he gave his eyes, the most precious thing for an Uchiha, to his brother, Izuna really didn't want to die. The resurrection technique obviously had its own nuances, possibly explaining Madara's behavior, but no matter how selfish the granddaughter's goals were, he was in her debt. For the gift of a second chance, even though his body was incomplete and he was still blind, and for the "I won't" dispel thrown in Madara's face. When Madara left, Izuna himself wasn't in the best of shape. His brother was against him living, but if there's one thing he's learned, it's not to let his emotions get in the way. He needs information and support from this girl, and to get it. Tears flowed from Izuna's eyes involuntarily, and it was unclear whether it was because of the pain from the wound on her thigh or because of her grandfather's words. "Are you trying to make me angry?" No. She wanted him to be happy. He should be happy, not. If yes, then congratulations, you succeeded. He was angry. Really angry. How could he fix it? Dispel the technique? Izuna glanced hesitantly at the sofa, who was keeping up a cool mask, but out of habit trying to look around with his empty eye sockets. Scary. She should probably bandage his eyes before dirt got in them. Although, come to think of it, could resurrected Edo Tensei even have problems with inflammation? Even if they didn't, it was worth being on the safe side, and he would actually look better that way. The girl bit her lip. No, there was no point in fanning the technique now that the job was done. If Izunaji himself asked her about it, she might still agree, but her grandfather wouldn't stop being angry that easily. Besides, the plan hadn't changed. He was angry now, but he'd cool down later and then. He'll be happy APID. Izuna held, unable to hold back her sobs, and covered her face with her hands, realizing a second later that no one would see her in such a state. True, there was no need to see. A cool, mockingly white hand, covered in cracks, which, however, were blurred by tears, fell on her shoulder. Something trembled in her chest. Who will be happy? Madara? Her grandfather's voice was strangely soft and comforting. Not at all like when he was just resurrected, but this pleasant tone fit well into the overall picture. Izuna sobbed louder, nodded, and only then remembered that the man could not see the movement. Why yes, she was shaking, and the pain in her hip only prevented her from calming down. Izunaji's face, quite clearly, as if in contrast to his previous expressiveness, showed interest, prompting her to explain her words. In fact, it would even be better if he knew the purpose of his stay here. I thought that grandfather. Madara would be happy if he saw Te. You. He was bored, I thought. I knew he would be angry, but I didn't thought it would be that much. The hiccups were certainly very opportune. The girl quieted down, letting her relative realize what had been said. Izuna was skeptical about the statement. Resurrected a man because her grandfather was bored? Too many years had passed to continue grieving over even the most precious person. The girl seemed naive and, he admitted, she might actually be, but that didn't mean the solution was so simple. Either she was hiding something, the Sharingan would be useful now, but the dojutsu was gone, as were the eyes, or someone was manipulating her. He would have to find out. Later. In my time there were no such techniques, Izuna began quietly and ingratiatingly, stroking the girl first on the shoulder, then on the head. An excessively close gesture for a near stranger, but she did not object, and he took advantage. And I do not know its nuances. But even without all this, my resurrection was a surprise, right? I suppose he just lost his temper. For the Madara he knew, his temper was a defining characteristic, but for the Madara he had become. Honestly, the unfamiliar, incredibly strong shinobi was hard to identify as Madara. Yes, the girl sighed, judging by the sounds. She wiped away her tears, tried to get up. And hissed. Shoo-shh-shh. You're hurt. Oh, right, she hurt herself, for some reason. Izuna had a vague idea why, but he concluded, an incredibly impulsive person. Maybe it would be to his advantage, maybe it would bring problems. We need to bandage it, stop the bleeding. There's blood there, right? Yes, Izuna looked down at the wound and added to herself, a lot of blood. I need to go to the Iranians and explain how I got so hurt. Well, yes, in his time, for sure, if the doctors heard that the patient had injured himself, they could have shied away from treating such an idiot. There were already plenty of wounded. If the idiot suffered a little and the case was not fatal, they could have tortured him. In general, Uchiha considered it fair, but now he should be on the side of one of the idiots. Will you get there? If he understood everything correctly, it was the leg that was injured. That was stupid, the arm wouldn't be so critical, at least he could leave, if he thought about it practically, but, again, it would only be useful to him. Although helping a blind man to walk, maybe you should help me? The worried expression on his face. Sofa seems so sweet when you meet him in person, and when he's not trying to figure things out in the usual shinobi way, yes. When he started to calm her down, Izuna really felt better. She heard her thoughts reflected back to someone who was not the least important in the situation. A slightly warm, it's unclear whether it was the fire chakra that felt that way or whether Edo Tensei imitated life so well, and even in life he had cold hands, but the warmth was felt, hand stroking her hair, a soothing voice, words. It was all nice. But could so many sources lie at once? According to the scrolls and the reviews of his clanmates, Izuna was not the kind of person who calms down anyone he meets. She is his granddaughter, but so what? Izuna didn't rule out that this could change something, that the elders and especially the historians might not know the sofa as well as they thought, but still, if we admit that this is all a game. She felt better. Now she needed to calm him down too. You know, Izuna, the familiar combination came naturally to the tongue, and there was no room for politeness. I'm not sure that your support just now was sincere. Sorry, I've just heard a lot about you. But, in general, if you need something, just say so. I'll help. In everything stuck in her throat. It suddenly occurred to her that she probably wouldn't agree to help destroy Senju. What if he decided to continue the war? But in other respects, his current condition was her responsibility, and since Madara wasn't ready to take on that burden yet, she would take care of Izuna herself. The wound hurt more. Izuna hissed. But all the worries about others come later. First you should take care of yourself. Izuna, how can this be? Ori exclaimed, treating the wound. Izuna sat on the couch, gasping every 3 seconds, and already cursing herself for not having responded to the question, how, with dramatic silence. Well, that is, imagination is an important criterion for the Uchiha, but in this situation it should have been restrained. If the clan medic means almost had a heart attack from the sight of her, okay, first holding the wound with their hands and then pulling them to their faces was a bad idea, and Izuna didn't stop her. He couldn't, since he himself didn't see. Then after her improvised story about how it happened. Well, she was original. No, I understand, of course, that you are not famous for your sense of self-preservation, but how could you even think of that? Weapons are not toys for you, Akami said sullenly, looking at everything from the corner with his arms crossed. In general, this medic almost always frowned, but always, as Izuna suspected, could well be connected with the fact that she usually came to him in exactly such situations, traumatized and with ridiculous excuses. The latter, however, were precisely excuses not so often, so his eternal grumbling was probably justified. One day, you might kill yourself. If such an injury had happened outside the village, by the way, you would have killed yourself. But I'm in the village, Izuna answered lightly, waving her hand. If she were outside the village, it could really cost her her life. What if she ran into an IWA or Suna shinobi? But since she was lucky, there was no point in thinking about it. She already had too many problems. So you'll save me. Meanwhile, there is one more point that I would like to avoid. And from Kagami too, huh? The girl put her sweetest smile on her face. The clansman naturally began to melt. Ori was about to open her mouth to confirm. But Akami was more seasoned. And you'll tell the headmaster everything yourself, Izuna. The man chuckled and, activating the medical equipment, put his palm to the wound. Ugh, how painful it is. Izuna clenched her teeth. Iriajutsu weakened the pain, but not much, and touching her leg seemed completely unnecessary and undesirable. But they only seemed so. I doubt that he will believe your story in our performance. You haven't even tried once, the Haim muttered and hissed when her hip flared with pain. What the hell is this? Will the wound heal soon? It will heal, the doctor rolled his eyes and, either demonstratively or just by chance, increased the amount of chakra in the technique. The wound and the skin around it began to burn a little. Uchiha medics are a bit of an oxymoron, yes. It's not that they're the only ones who have trouble with Iryojutsu, it's just that fire chakra significantly complicates the learning process, and the Sharingan is not the only Kekkei Genkai of the Uchiha. At times like these, when it seemed that she would not be cured but burned, Izuna involuntarily admitted that she would prefer to be treated by her other relatives, the Senju. True, they only accepted her as an ordinary patient, sometimes VIP class, but still only a patient. And finally, after another 15 minutes, the glow disappeared. It's done, Izuna-Haim. Ori-chan, bandage it. And, as always, not completely, Haim thought, holding back a sigh, looking somewhat doomedly at the unhealed wound. At least now it is not so deep. Come again tomorrow morning or afternoon, the medic said importantly, rising from his knees. Izuna carefully slid off the couch onto the floor when her clanmate finished bandaging. It wasn't as easy as normal, but still better than before the treatment. And don't forget, head. It would be better for Kagami-dano to know about this before he hears rumors. Rumors were the scourge of the Uchiha clan. Shinobi loved to exchange information, they knew how to extract it from gossip and other people's conversations, but the Uchiha were a closed clan, and, as if to compensate for the fact that they usually did not arrange an exchange of fresh news with outsiders, actually. Why exchange information if you can take it? With allies, perhaps, it is unethical, but with enemies, quite. In the family circle any news spread at the speed of light. Shinobi loved accuracy, but rumors are rumors, they tend to grow overgrown with details and speculation, which, of course, do not say that they are speculation. Haim hurt her leg, she did not want to check how this news could be distorted. It is fun to watch how the truth changes, but now she has one disgruntled great uncle and one blind native resurrected grandfather at home, a chic set for the weekend. There will be something to do. Remembering Madara's anger, Izuna immediately became sad. She just had to wait, but waiting was so hard. What if time didn't help? Should she even talk to her grandfather about this? Push the brothers towards each other so that the eldest of them would thaw out faster? Talk to Izuna-ji? He also wanted to improve his relationship with Madara, right? All these thoughts were clearly written on the girl's face, but no one could read them, naturally. Without a key, you can't decipher the code, so her clanmates, who didn't know about Madara, Edo Tensei, and other details of the situation, interpreted her expression in their own way. Don't be afraid, Izuna-Haim, Akami reassured her, losing his mask of a doctor who was stingy with emotions. Kagami-dano will just grumble a little and that's it. Well, he'll argue a little, you'll make a sad face and he'll melt. In the meantime, would you like some candy? The Uchiha nodded and accepted the treat automatically. The clansman was definitely not talking about Madara, and Kagami was quite different from his second cousin. Very different. But not so much that some things didn't affect them in the same way. During the argument, she was screaming, they were both angry. Was this the time to be sad? Izuna doubted, to put it mildly, that it would help in this situation, but nothing could hurt to try. Maybe it would work. It didn't work. Even the dead will say no. Commentary on and the dead say no. Oh, that's it. I'm tired of coming up with these names. The sale could have come out last night, but I couldn't come up with a name for a long time. So maybe I'll change their style soon. Through Izuna's masks, as a rule, they saw only berries of the same field as him, people weaving their webs of lies, so the girl's words noticeably surprised him. Could he have made a mistake with the psychological portrait? But her next words did not fit into the new one, compiled taking into account the information received. The promise to help. Probably, considering that she was his granddaughter and they were clanmates, it was appropriate, but the paranoia developed over years of constant struggle for his life forced him to think deeper and look for additional motives. So many questions were pounding in his head, but the potential ally who agreed to give answers to them left, and there was only one person left, the changes in whom seemed more important than all the changes in the world. Madara. For most of Izuna's life, his older brother was his number one priority, and over the years, numbers 2, 3, and so on replaced each other. Once his father was number 2, then a girl became number 2, who presumably became the mother of his child, or children, but no one could challenge Madara's primacy. Only the clan, but Izuna was used to not separating Madara and the Uchiha clan. The changes in his brother were too abrupt and too striking, even though there were none now. As a censor, Izuna was quite capable of recognizing a familiar person even without sight, but the problem was that the strangely changed chakra, although it clearly belonged to Madara, made the situation even worse, since even completely identical to his memory, it could not discourage the wariness that arose in front of the person his brother had become. The wariness, however, as well as the clear awareness that Madara was clearly not in a good mood, did not change his intentions. Izuna needed to talk to his brother, no matter how the conversation ended. Being afraid of his beloved Nai-san. He had not yet sunk to that. The Uchiha's chakra, enraged by his granddaughter's antics, Izuna suddenly realized that it was much easier for him to call the girl Madara's granddaughter than his own. His brother had clearly taken on the responsibility of caring for his descendants, did not raise any doubts regarding his location. Madara for some reason tried to hide his chakra, as Izuna noted, but in such an emotional state it was not so easy to do so. It cannot be denied, such a layout was very advantageous for the censor, since visually and even by ear he doubted that he would have found what he was looking for. The warm wood beneath his feet felt extremely good. So much so that it had never felt before he had given up his eyes. Being bedridden, Izuna had never gotten up from it, so naturally, this was the first time he had felt this feeling. When one type of perception stops working, others become more acute to compensate. But could his heightened hearing, smell, and touch replace his eyes? Replace his Sharingan? It was not the time to think about it, when the technique keeping him in the world of the living could be cancelled at any moment, and then his vision would be of no use to him, but the thoughts themselves crept into his head, not leaving Izuna alone. The anxious thoughts retreated as soon as the man approached the place where his brother was felt, closely, but it did not become easier. The worries changed. Nisan, his own voice seemed wrong, although Izuna knew that it sounded confident enough for the situation. However, it would be foolish to think that Madara, who had known him all his life, would not notice the hidden emotions. "May I come in?" And, out of habit, without waiting for verbal permission, Izuna opened the door. The smell of a new room with a noticeable admixture of ink hit his nose. That was the smell of his brother's office. Even without seeing Madara, for some reason he was sure that he was not surprised. Intuition said that he was not. The sensory sensation of restless chakra suggested that Madara was in confusion. Probably, that was the case. "Izuna," Nisan's voice sounded different, more hoarse and dry, but it undoubtedly belonged to him. "We need to talk," Izuna voiced the obvious thought. A quiet chuckle came from Madara. He was of the same opinion. The reluctance to return home had been sickeningly familiar these past few days, but this time Izuna deliberately stayed late not so much because of the gloomy atmosphere in the house, but because of banal fear. In essence, the reason is the same: it is uncomfortable at home, but before she simply did not want to sit in silence in the presence of another person, and now she was afraid of a repeat of that scene. She stabbed herself in the leg, and her grandfather did not react. Well, isn't that an indicator? Sitting on an old swing not even in the neighborhood, but on the outskirts of Konoha, so as not to run into acquaintances, she watched the orange disk of the sunset, and dimly realized that it was time to go. She was leaving for the medics, but several hours had already passed. No matter how incompetent the Uchiha medics were considered, an opinion, as it seemed to her, perhaps justified in some way, but completely unfair, there are worse, and her clan simply pays little attention to it, even they could have completely healed the wound in such a short time. However, the thigh, bandaged with brand new bandages, was still bleeding, much less, but still, blood had already appeared on the white. This was because it was not worth running around the village like a madwoman when you had such a wound. But what could you do now? For some reason, Akami's words kept playing over and over in her head. "He'll scold her a little, you'll make a sad face, and he'll melt." Imagining this in the context of Madara, Izuna burned with shame, because the scene was completely false, more like a parody, which is what it was. Kagami, scolding her for her carelessness, might have really thought out, but he would have been worried about her, and that's why he would have moved on to comforting the victim. Madara was angry at her. What's more, he was furious. He was in a cold, mutely dangerous, hostile mood. Beloved grandpa, huh? It wasn't long ago that she even dared to call him grandpa. And even if behavior spoke louder than words before, the essence of this man hasn't changed. Whoever he was to her, he remains a dangerous shinobi who doesn't shy away from getting his hands dirty. Only before, he didn't dirty them with her. Now? Now she's cowardly inclined to think that something might change. So far, she's the only one who's hurt herself, but even if Madara just loses his temper and miscalculates his strength, he could hurt her? To hurt sounds much softer than to kill. But still, even if in this formulation it looks like a third-rate performance, it's worth a try, Izuna decided and abruptly jumped off the swing. Her leg shot with pain. Exo. The swing that didn't stop hit her from behind. Ugh. Izuna was walking along the garden path from the gate when she saw a sofa coming out as if to meet her. Izuna-ji was not holding himself quite confidently, giving off a general aura of awkwardness that being blind was unusual for him, but he was still moving too purposefully towards her. By all logic, the girl, who should have quickened her pace, on the contrary, slowed it down, suddenly catching herself thinking that she did not want to approach her grandfather. What to say? How to behave? Thinking over the manner of behavior with Madara, regarding the role of Izuna-ji in this, she still had not decided. Her own grandfather, her direct ancestor, was like a stranger to her. And he was also the physical embodiment of all the problems that were bothering her now. And when a pained expression crept onto her face, Izuna could only be glad that no one would see it. The idiotic plan, the idea that was haunting her, was only to demonstrate how much Grandpa's behavior affected her. So that she, in turn, could see that the anger was temporary, that he had not changed. It even sounded stupid. And on top of that, in response to the storm in her soul, her face was itching to break into a smile, and her tongue was itching to say that everything was fine. Wanting to notice the expected reaction to her sadness, Izuna at the same time wanted to ignore the problems. As always. Sometimes it worked. It would probably work this time too. I originally planned to just wait, she thought on the way home, but as soon as she saw the sofa's face, there was no trace of this thought. Grimacing a peaceful smile. He looked almost the same as she had left him. But something had changed. Some kind of pain that had slipped across his face from time to time had disappeared. Everything would be fine, but a premonition demanded that she do at least something to calm the anxiety. Izuna-ji, Haim smiled, even knowing that no one could see her. Not for him, but for herself. Good evening. Just think, evening, the man said into the void, turning his face to the last rays of the sun. The blackness under his eyelids made his skin crawl, but Izuna didn't dare say it out loud. Sofa lowered his head and his eyes, closed, looked much nicer. Long dark strands slid down his cheeks. Kind. The realization that all those who spoke about their external similarities were right was not pleasant. Grandfather sat opposite her, head bowed, elbows on the table, and clearly listening to the sounds of the world around him. This made eating in his company even more uncomfortable. The rice and the tasty sauce that she had liked yesterday did not go down her throat, although her stomach threatened to burst into howls. Izuna felt like she was even swallowing, almost without chewing, too loudly. Letting the sofa appreciate the serenades from her stomach seemed like a real nightmare, and that was the only reason she forced herself to eat. The empty conversation that had started on the street died down as soon as they entered the kitchen, and the silence that had followed since then seemed so transparent that it seemed as if her breath, only hers, was about to turn into steam, as in the cold. It was no wonder that Izuna heard footsteps, quiet but not silent. Madara, in truth, liked to demonstrate his strength by slightly disregarding the rule that a ninja should be invisible. Seconds before the source of this sound entered the room. With Madara's arrival, the air seemed to become even colder, but at the same time it was no longer transparent. His heavy aura, whether it was real or just Izuna's fantasy, made breathing difficult. Jumping up from her seat too abruptly, the girl ran to give her grandfather some tea. And the movements felt wooden, the clatter of the plate too loud. grandfather did absolutely nothing, but such a demonstrative disregard clearly had the intended effect. It was very, very offensive, and her nose was unbearably stinging. Planning to demonstrate her sadness, Azuna did not expect that she would not have to fake anything. And who needed demonstrations when she would soon burst into tears anyway? The idea of pressing on the pity of someone who de facto presented himself as a person who did not know her, in general, regularly seemed idiotic, giving way to the plan, be patient, everything will pass, but now, although she gave in again, she could not bear it. Madara suppressed an irritated sigh at the tears that glistened in his granddaughter's eyes. Having managed to decide on such an adventure, she cries only at the slightest hint of discontent. What did she expect? Joy? Gratitude? The past hours were enough to cool down, but not to stop being angry. And the gleam that never left the guilty girl's eyelashes throughout the entire meal was downright infuriating. The reasons for such an act were vaguely understood, although Madara knew that Azuna did not need weighty ones. She was inflamed with the desire to meet her idol in person. She did everything to overcome any obstacles on the way to this. Even death. And this ease with which the little thing crossed the line was even more infuriating. As was Azuna's unwillingness to bear responsibility for opening wounds that had already been hurting for so many years. Was it worth it for him to see his brother, knowing that he did not dare to detain his soul and that the one for whom he wanted to build a world would not see him? He now had his own ideal world. His brother should have been left in the past, and it took Madara a long time to accept this, and now everything was going to hell. Because of this. Carelessly throwing his chopsticks onto his plate, Uchiha risked breaking the silence by resuming their previous conversation when his gaze caught a small movement. A tear that rolled down. Instead of whining, it would be better to cancel the technique, he said harshly. He didn't want to force his granddaughter to do it, because Madara, despite his bad mood, clearly understood that using the manjikyu on her again would mean crossing the line for him. Resentment, tears, hysterics. A small price, but how much it increases, it's worth thinking about how resentment can grow into fear. Blind, humiliating and disgusting, like many others who met him. If you don't know how, I'll help. True, on the edge of consciousness there was a thought that he had already scared her, the offense had already outgrown. Azuna's look at him made him remember their first meetings, when she also looked at him with apprehension. Under the table, Azuna clenched her hands into fists, crumpling the hem of her dress. It seemed that her grandfather's slightly softened tone was throwing her off balance even more than the words spoken harshly. I won't cancel it, she said, swallowing hard, preparing for an argument. I know the seals, but I won't cancel the technique. Azuna, Madara's voice took on a growling tone. Sofa didn't even flinch, it was so obvious that he was addressing her. Do you even understand what kind of technique this is? Unholy resurrection technique, Azuna answered readily, and the wound began to hurt from the pressure of her hands. Great. Maybe the pain would give her strength. Arguing with her grandfather, it was very difficult mentally. The dead must remain dead, echoed her own thoughts before her resurrection. What were you trying to achieve by pulling a reposed soul from its intended world? Fists clenched until they turned white, with nowhere else to clench, Azuna grits her teeth, stopping this self-torture only for answers. Answers, damn answers. What was she trying to achieve? Happiness. For him. And if the dead didn't want to die, is that bad too? The girl looked at her grandfather, silently sitting at the table with them, without embarrassment. He didn't say anything, didn't enter into their argument either then or now, and yet, perhaps, his opinion is the most important here. Izunaji, he died by force. Who would want to die young? Izunaji himself wants to retire? There was a senseless challenge in his voice. Madara didn't openly press key or raise his voice, unlike her, but some invisible pressure was getting on her nerves. And Azuna expected to share this pressure with her namesake. She was right, wasn't she? Izunaji, we need to make sure of this. But it can't be otherwise, can it? You want me to dispel the technique? This question seemed to make Madara shudder. And the sofa? No, he answered quietly and added, I'm sorry, Madara, but no. I don't want to. After talking with his brother, Azuna vaguely understood his motives. His brother hadn't stopped loving him, he just didn't want to feel pain again, dragging out the inevitable. But Azuna didn't feel what Madara expected from him. He didn't want die. The new life, even though all its shortcomings were not yet felt and realized, was much more to his liking than the prospect of dissolving into eternity. Because Azuna did not remember anything from the afterlife and his last memory was the impossible desire to stay alive. Azuna thought that such an answer would be the beginning of the end. Sofu was apologizing, so that must have angered Madara-ji, right? But his words turned the conversation, and after that, something changed. Between the brothers. Grandfather no longer demanded that she cancel the technique. Commentary on and the dead say no. Everything may have come out a bit crumpled, but halfway through the chapter one realized that a clear no from Azuna would solve everything. What's the point of Madara insisting if her beloved brother doesn't want to retire? And in the following chapters, the relationship should improve. Perhaps we'll get a couple of chapters of fluff, in about 100 years, or maybe in a few days. Does anyone even remember this work? Survivors, please respond. Equals 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 and the world of the living will turn equals 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 equals. Commentary on and the world of the living will turn. It has risen. It sounds rather ironic in the context of the story itself, but that's how it is. I've been slowly but steadily finishing this part for the last week, and now it's finally ready. Enjoy reading. Madara-ji and Sofu. Izuna had always known that normal brotherly relations were nothing compared to what they had. Izuna-ji had died 30 years ago, but Madara's wound had never fully healed. He had spared her only because she vaguely reminded him of his brother. And later he had not killed her because it had come to light, she was his only descendant. That was all. That was her entire value, and only later, perhaps, had some kind of attachment to her personally arisen. Affection based on the same thing. On Izuna-ji. With this had to be put up with, because there was nothing else, and someone didn't even have this. And someone was dead, while she remained alive and even had somewhat warm relations with her closest relative. And it didn't even upset her, because there was rarely a reason to think about it. But now it was impossible to forget about it. Grandpa is just still angry with me, the girl convinced herself, and he needs to talk to Izuna-ji, we haven't spoken for 30 years. But still, some alienation from Madara was felt quite clearly. The former mutual understanding between him and the sofa was being restored with great speed, they were not even embarrassed by the current age difference, and now Madara was more than twice as old as his brother. And at the same time, every time Izuna entered the room, her grandfather would throw her such a look. That was how it was now. Izuna hesitated on the threshold, and under the gazes empty of the sofa, and cold of Madara-ji of the grandfathers, she wanted to run away. As always. It seemed that as soon as Madara-ji saw her, he immediately remembered her misdeed. And this despite the fact that she was right, he needed his brother. Fortunately, or unfortunately, such glances were cast by her grandfather only at the very beginning, when she entered. And after that, everything seemed to be as before. Only the strain of this ordinary was too noticeable. Izuna-chan? Come in, Sofu smiled, and if you didn't know that there was emptiness under his eyelids, you might think that he was squinting cutely. Izuna couldn't help but smile back. Even though by all logic she should have been jealous of Madara towards Sofu, that hadn't happened yet, and she even liked her own grandfather. Because he liked her. Right away, without any formality, and he hadn't even seen her, he couldn't appreciate how similar she was to him. It was just obvious, despite all the severity and cruelty that slipped into Izuna-ji's tone when the conversation turned to something related to war and politics, that he favored her. Most likely, of course, she interrupted some important super-duper secret conversation between two insidious and secret shinobi, but they always talk about everything and anything anyway. And they actually have a granddaughter. For 3 days Izuna didn't bother her grandfathers at all, but after that her patience reserves ran out. Now everything has even become habitual. What are you talking about? Are you making plans to take over the world? I want to too, the girl rattled off, sitting down on the mat with her relatives. She hadn't planned to show her frustration and, in fact, she didn't show it, knowing that sooner or later Madara would sigh heavily, look at her with resignation and stop being angry. It sounded idyllic, but that's what happened every time. Plans to take over the world, yes, the sofa hadn't gotten used to it yet, but everything was still ahead. Madara only snorted at such claims. If he snorted, it meant it wasn't about taking over, although it was still plans. But if he'd glared suspiciously, then yes, it meant he was thinking about how to enslave humanity. What nonsense, Grandpa might have said, if it were nonsense. But it wasn't, so he didn't say anything. Don't talk nonsense, he finally snorted, and Izuna only answered him in her thoughts, it's not nonsense at all, and you know it. However, Madara's insidious enslaving plans were the last thing on everyone's minds right now. Inter-family relations came to the forefront. No, me and Nai-san, with Madara, Sofu's attitude to his new status as a grandfather, and more grandfatherly than grandpa, was partly funny. It was funny to watch how his face slightly distorted when he tried to change the manner of speech to the one adults should use to talk to children. Izuna-ji was interesting in many different senses of the word. And some senses often contradicted others. We decided to go for a walk outside of Konoha. Sofu pronounced the name of the village much more confidently and without even wincing. Izuna-ji may not have winced, but Izuna winced when she realized that in all likelihood, Madara and I meant Madara and I, without you. I want to too. Izuna shouted right away, before one of the old men, and it was hard to figure out who was more likely, aloud the thought that it would be nice to run off somewhere without her. There's no way we can do it without her. Can we? The final destination is 10 hours from the village, something inside her felt disgusting. Such a thought, why did Madara-ji allow it? Not Izuna-ji, for whom she was still a stranger, who shouldn't trust her too much, especially in such a vulnerable state, but Madara, who? There won't be anything interesting for you there. Lies. They had always had fun before, anywhere. Because she was the one who provided the fun. On the contrary, if she stayed, nothing fun would happen, and Grandpa couldn't help but understand that. Nothing fun would happen. But something important would happen, and she had to miss it? A nasty feeling of betrayal arose in her soul. But it was not new. Well, is that possible? Izuna asked with burning eyes, moving even closer to her grandfather, to both of them, and almost climbing onto the sofa's lap with her hands. Izuna, Madara drawled her name in a strange way. There won't be anything. Obviously, the grandpa was against her participation in this expedition. It made her want to curl up somewhere and pretend to be sad. Before, she would have definitely done just that, lie down so that the evil grandpa could see how he had offended her, make a sad face, shed a tear. But in that case, they definitely wouldn't have taken her along, and that was exactly what Izuna had set as her goal, to be taken along. Madara was disappointed in her, and she in him. So there was only one reliable way to get a place in the squad. The sofa, of course, didn't see how cute her eyes were, how long her eyelashes were, and couldn't even appreciate the play of her facial expressions, but he heard her well, and that's why he was completely imbued with her cute pleading voice. Izuna-ji? Not a mistake. Izuna-ji is a cuter and more childish version of Izuna-ji. Izuna is just flirting? Having drawn out this trembling Izuna-ji as impressively as she could, Izuna held her breath. Izuna-ji was actually quite susceptible to her charms. There was even a reason for this, reinforced by him. He really wanted children, so despite everything he was glad that he had a granddaughter, but if there was something more hidden behind this walk, then… Izuna decided this, if Izuna-ji refused, then it was definitely something extremely important, and she could go and be offended, cry, complain, to someone Madara-ji is no longer allowed. Because she would hardly be able to find out anything, but if he agreed… Of course, why not? Unlike Izuna-ji, Izuna saw his facial expressions. Of course, in comparison with the expressiveness of her facial expressions, his was nowhere near. He didn't set expressiveness as his goal, but this emotion, long familiar, could be identified as melted. Sometimes, because of this grimace, it seemed that she hadn't resurrected the sofa, but had divided Madara into two parts, the kind grandfatherly one and the scary Madara one. But that was a stupid thought. Although Izunaji openly enjoyed his grandfatherly behavior, did he even know that she resurrected him for Madara-ji? He didn't have as much in common with his brother as it seemed at first. It was strange, but Izunaji's character somehow reminded her of the Shodai Hokage, as she imagined him. It was really strange, especially considering that Izunaji himself, upon hearing this, would immediately leave his kind relative mode. After all, the Shodai Hokage is Hashirama Senju. Now, if with Madara it still happened that fantasies came to mind that if he had found out about her blood, he would not have changed the relationship, then with Sofa there was no doubt he would have changed, and for the worse. The same fantasy added that now Izunaji would certainly check with Madara-ji if he was okay with taking their granddaughter with him, because Izunaji was quite delicate in such matters. But no. Izunaji didn't clarify anything, as if he also thought that her presence should be taken for granted. But Madara didn't think so, and he, in truth. "I don't think you should come with us," Madara said darkly. He was so clearly against it. Did he really think she would ruin things for them that much? "Don't you have things to do?" "No." Izuna exclaimed, scowling, preparing to defend herself. They would put pressure on her, but if she held out, then her grandfather would simply give in, and that would be it. Of course, he wouldn't be happy, he would be very unhappy, but it wouldn't be that easy to get rid of her. "You know that's nothing to be proud of, right?" Madara teased her in his usual manner. But Izuna wasn't buying it. She wasn't relaxing. "If you have something to do, find it. You probably have something to do. Izuna and I will be back the next morning. I repeat, I don't think you'll." "Well, if you don't think, then think. Are you stupid or something? Can't you think? You're smart, aren't you?" It was definitely not worth asking for trouble, but if there had been objective reasons for her to stay, Grandpa would have easily eliminated them. But the reason was the most subjective. Izuna offered Madara an obvious solution, but he didn't even think to use it. "Stop shouting," the grandfather said, demonstratively dry and calm, as if to set an example. Usually, Izuna wasn't embarrassed by this, they always talked like this, she loudly, and he like an adult and reasonable person, and only when it came to the extreme point, they changed. He would start yelling, and she would calmly blink her eyelashes and quietly say all sorts of nonsense, but there was something in his tone. He needed to shut up. "I'm not screaming," she practically whispered. How? How could she make them take her along? What were they planning to do there? There was silence for a second. 2 seconds. 3. On the 5th, she asked, "Have you thought about it yet?" Izunaji seemed to have choked. The dynamics of their relationship seemed strange and somehow funny to him. But there was nothing funny, especially now. Madara-ji looked dry. Still dry. All he needed was an irritated sigh, like a disturbed dragon, ready at any moment and with pleasure to hit the annoying knight on the head with his tail and, in addition, breathe a searing flame on him. A flame so hot that all the armor would immediately melt, leaving the poor knight defenseless. And then it would not be difficult to finish him off, if he was not already dead. All these metaphors were not as far from the truth as one might think. If Grandpa had said something nasty to her in earnest, Izuna would have instantly lost all her mental balance, and would have definitely lost this argument. I thought, she listened to Madara's voice as best she could, trying to find causticity in it. But his voice remained calm. Dry. He didn't want to waste his energy on her anymore, because he had Izunaji. Let me rephrase, you're not going anywhere. Period. What do you mean, nowhere? So that she would shut up after a simple period? That would never happen. Of course, Izuna didn't want to ruin the relationship even more. Of course, she didn't really want to get into trouble, she didn't want to argue at all, he started it himself. But, of course, she had never been obedient and, even if it weren't necessary, she wouldn't have accepted such a decision without complaint. I'll go wherever I want. And you know, this is all very suspicious. What are you planning to do there? Business, Madara said bluntly, and Izuna froze. Business? Madara's business was not something she was allowed to meddle in. Madara's business was connected to what she wanted, but could not prevent. Lately, as it seemed to Izuna, her grandfather had led her closer to his secrets, had begun to trust her a little more, and she even thought that soon he himself would tell her about his plans. But then everything collapsed. Sofa resurrected, not by itself, which was the worst thing. Grandpa got angry at her. What kind of trust was there? And although Izuna wanted to defend her right to participate in this family expedition, in light of the information that had been revealed, it was not worth doing. Because, in general, she had never even allowed the thought that she was higher on Madara's list of priorities than his goal. "It's all clear with you," she muttered at the end, feeling a painful annoyance. It would be fine if Madara didn't take anyone into his affairs except Zetsu, who is essentially Madara himself, but Izuna, no, let him stay at home, but Izuna-ji, great. That's it now, I'll shut up, Izuna thought, but Madara-ji didn't understand it. Just as she didn't perceive his point as the end of the conversation, so he didn't guess that she was carrying on purely by inertia and that she, in general, wasn't going to argue anymore. Madara looked down at his grandniece and suppressed a sigh. As always, she was rustling, complaining about something, shouting. It was clear that she was jealous. If he himself, as usual, had gone on business, Izuna would not have uttered a peep, except perhaps she would have started whining for him to stay late, but he was taking his brother with him, and that changed everything. If it really was a regular walk, there would be no difficulty. The fact that the little thing had reached the apogee of her recklessness did not mean that he intended to push her out of his life. Rather, Madara began to think about the reasons for such a result, and came to the conclusion that he himself should devote time to raising the little one, since no one was doing it. However, there was nothing ordinary about this sortie. What would happen there, his granddaughter definitely shouldn't see. Madara couldn't say directly, "There will be something I don't want to show you." It was obvious, it was in the air, and it was completely the wrong wording. Some ordinary reason was needed, something that would calm Izuna down at least a little. An excuse didn't immediately come to mind. When he left to do things that the girl shouldn't know about, Madara said nothing. But here it was necessary to say something. She was growing up, and soon they wouldn't be able to pretend so easily that his absences were nothing to worry about. Growing up. Compare how old you are and how old he is, he finally threw out. Yes, a good excuse. When Izuna grows up to the age of Izuna, he really will have no choice but to lift the veil of secrecy a little. The main thing is to clearly set the condition, when he grows up, in his brains, first of all, but it is not necessary to voice this, then he will impose himself on dubious trips. This arrangement, this guarantee should have calmed Izuna down. However, Madara knew that the small fry would not accept even such favorable conditions so easily. She would not accept it precisely because the small fry sincerely considered herself an adult, independent and, what was even funnier, reasonable. Madara had no doubts about the independence of the active girl. This is what her independence had led her to. The man glanced briefly at his brother, resurrected by the whim of one little brat, but he did not consider his granddaughter either an adult or, even more so, reasonable. He would have liked to, but it did not work out. In the times when he was still young and when his brother was alive, really alive, children matured early, but fortunately, or unfortunately, their granddaughter was born in a completely different era. She was gradually entering marriageable age, but with her brain. She thought like a child. But the trifle did not share the point of view of her grandfather, who had seen many idiots, adults, among them, about herself. Precisely because she sincerely did not consider herself a trifle. For a blissful second, the calm before the storm, there was silence. The girl slowly opened her mouth in silent indignation, took a deep breath. "We're only 10 years apart." She barked so loudly that her ears popped for a moment, and angrily stamped her foot, which in her words meant only one thing: there was going to be an explosion. While he had the chance, Madara himself took a deep breath and stocked up on patience. By shinobi standards, this is complete bullshit. If he can go with you just because he's an adult, you see, then I'll go too. I'm an adult too. Isn't that right? And since we've already started this topic, do you know what? For some reason, in your stories, when you're 13, you already have all the rights and no one limits you in such trifles as family hikes, especially for such a stupid reason, but why only me? In your opinion, I'm immediately petty. I demand justice. And let me remind you, in the life of a ninja, age is the last thing they look at when they're recruiting a squad. So, I don't suit you in any other way, right? But Izuna-ji, it turns out, suits you? Izuna was delivering her tirade at such a speed that it was not always possible to understand the meaning of her words. She spoke clearly, but too emotionally, and, in addition, Madara had long ago learned to isolate the main points. However, he knew what he was going to say even before he heard his granddaughter's reaction to his statement. In my time, Shinobi didn't have a childhood, but you do, and I'm not going to deprive you of it, he said clearly and distinctly when his granddaughter stopped to catch her breath. Uchiha softened his voice as much as his pride allowed him to. Even if it was a bit awkward to show his weakness for his granddaughter in front of his brother. Because he didn't allow that even towards his brother simply didn't need it. Stop arguing, Izuna. This is a matter for adults. When you grow up, I'll tell you everything and show you everything myself. He must not have spoken to her in that tone for weeks. This feeling of having to pull himself together so as not to soften too much had become alien lately. But while the educational process was going on, Madara tried not to give in to weakness and not to show too clearly that the offense was forgotten. However, he did not want to give a categorical refusal in a harsh form. Education is education, but Izuna could perceive it any way she wanted, and he would not be there to control it. His imagination had previously given him colorful pictures of what this girl could do, but reality turned out to be more terrible. Now fantasies were more like nightmares. Izuna, who was about to continue her tirade, froze with a surprised expression on her face. In her usual stupid manner, she opened her eyes wide, blinked her eyelashes, and didn't even close her mouth. I got it, Madara chuckled to himself. The girl began, immediately stopping and still not collecting her thoughts. Her eyes suddenly narrowed, as if his statement had moved her to tears, and that had happened. Izuna lowered her head so that her bangs covered her eyes, reflecting all her feelings, and then raised it, and her gaze was no longer shining. Izuna was angry. I don't believe you. She shouted, startling Madara, who had been expecting something different with pure confidence, and surprised him even more by abruptly running out of the room. What the? Unexpectedly. He said in the silence, the kind that had never happened in the company of his granddaughter. Izuna shouldn't have been angry. And if she was angry, she had never run away from him before. Feeling angry towards him, she didn't feel fear. For her, these were mutually exclusive concepts. She didn't shrink back, didn't run away, she started shouting her stupid arguments at him, why he was wrong, argued and was stubborn to the end, of his nerves or patience. She didn't run away. Lately, major changes had affected them all. He had demonstratively cooled off, and was paying a lot of attention to his resurrected brother, the first Izuna. And with his granddaughter, God knows what was going on. Madara had completely stopped understanding her. And in light of recent events, this was worrying. Well, you know, Izuna's voice rang out in the deathly silence and was momentarily drowned out by the rustling. The man tried to get up. I wouldn't believe you here either. The contrast is too great. True. Their relationship had changed too much in the days since their resurrection. The old behavior now seemed suspicious and inappropriate. Nisan. I don't really understand why you don't want to take Izuna-chan with you, his brother continued, looking at him with darkness from under half-closed eyelids. Izuna had been wearing the bandage more and more often in recent days. He didn't need it, the dead might not be afraid of infection, but it was more comfortable for the living. Izuna-chan was clearly afraid of the black holes where the Sharingan should burn, and Izuna wanted to get along with his descendant too much to advocate for his own convenience. Would there be anything dangerous for her there? It's just. I don't want her to learn anything like that again, Madara replied, not listening to the end. He could easily protect both his blind brother and his granddaughter from any danger, but there is only one way to save them from such dangers, not to let them near. Our granddaughter absorbs bad examples too well. It's better to let her sulk for a day than to do something stupid again. If you think so, I'll trust your experience, Izuna didn't argue. Let's finish this as soon as possible. I want to see everything. Madara chuckled softly. He would like that too. He really wanted to finally look into his dear eyes. Commentary on and the world of the living will turn. The main difficulty in writing this chapter was the need to create an atmosphere that everything seemed to be going well on one hand, but there were alarm bells from Azuna's point of view on the other. I hope I succeeded in this. I would also like to note the uniqueness of the relationship between the two Azuna, but it is a bad idea to fill the notes with this. I'm planning to gather my strength and start writing the 7th part while it's hot, but I don't think it will come out that soon, huh? If you liked the chapter, please write reviews. I really want to discuss this fic. And the living dead will win Commentary on and the living dead will win. In short, screw it, I give up. I'm tired of giving these monotonous names. My imagination has dried up. It's barely enough for a plot and text puns. Her nose was unpleasantly stuffy, but there was nothing to blow it into, so Azuna kept wiping her snot with her hand. Her eyes had been wet for half an hour, but she tried her best to keep from bursting into tears the way she was used to, out loud, loudly, and without shame. She didn't give a damn about Madara-ji in this matter, but Azuna-ji. She didn't want to behave like that in front of the sofa. He was a stranger, an outsider. But who is the outsider here now? This depressing thought made tears flow like a stream, burying all over my knees. Madara had always been quite straightforward. If he was categorically against something, he would say it like this: I said no, so it's no. And if he spoke softly, entering the mode of a kind grandfather, then he was not being hypocritical. And here is the sweet tone, hiding a second bottom. Something must have happened on this walk. Something special, since he was dragging a blind and disoriented Azuna-ji along with him, but did not take her. The reason was clearly not that Azuna-ji was stronger than her. Firstly, because it was not a fact, and secondly, because Madara would never risk his brother, even an immortal one, again. And then, Madara did not need anyone's help when it came to strength. Therefore, the reason was trust. Azuna-ji did not disappoint the grandpa, did not disturb the peace of a person important to him, was an original, in the end. And she was a failure on all counts. Madara didn't trust her, and although it wasn't exactly news, thinking about it and realizing that it was no longer hidden, not hushed up, was unbearable. She is becoming more and more unnecessary. Azuna sobbed, and the sobs finally escaped from her throat. She buried her face in her knees, covered by her now wet dress, and began to sob. Loudly. Heartrendingly. Not at all theatrical, because the theater could no longer help her. She had no strength to act. The shinobi's keen hearing picked up sounds within the house with impeccable ease. Especially these. Sobbing, crying, it had been going on for an hour now, and it was getting on his nerves. Most often, if his granddaughter started crying, Madara would quickly give in, it wasn't worth it, or she would stop crying herself, realizing that he wasn't going to give in on a particular issue. But this was a different case. She really shouldn't have been involved in this matter, and Madara couldn't just walk up to her and say, "Okay, I'll take you with me. Stop crying." But Azuna wasn't calming down either, and seemed to be getting even more heated. And while he definitely shouldn't have even considered the possibility of compromise, for the sake of this stupid girl, the brother was laconic after their granddaughter ran out of the room screaming. The memory of his gestures, character, said that he was worried. Azuna obviously noticed what weakness Madara had for his descendant, but he did not fully understand what he was guided by, refusing such a form. For Azuna, everything, both the outside world and the current world of their family, was unusual and unfamiliar. "She's been screaming for half an hour," he finally noticed, and turned slightly toward Madara, as if trying to look into his face out of habit. But he had nothing to look with. For now. "Is it just because you refuse to take her with you, or is there something I don't know about this?" Madara told him a lot, but not everything. Azuna was aware of his brother's strange idea, but there was little information about the upcoming event. Madara said that it didn't matter, that all that was required from Azuna was his presence. Azuna nodded, agreeing to participate in a not entirely clear adventure, since he was used to trusting his brother completely and to the end. But still, the scene that happened made him wonder, Was there some kind of catch in the plan? Izuna didn't even think about the fact that Madara could harm him, dismissing such a thought on the approach. His brother would not do it, and even if he wanted to, he would not go out of his way. In some things, Madara had not changed a bit. He still disliked unnecessary complications of simple things, although, undoubtedly, he had become much more experienced in drawing up multi-stage plans. What was the idea itself worth? Another thought involuntarily crept into his head: does Madara want to somehow cancel the technique that resurrected him? But here the question of trust arose again. They had a conversation about this in the first days, and Madara said directly, "I don't want you to die. Never again." However, there was something in Izuna-chan's reaction. Was it simple jealousy and resentment, or was there something more behind it? The first option was hard to believe for Izuna, who grew up in a world where tears were not allowed even at funerals. A trifle. Tessin is simply not used to being refused, that's why she's hysterical, Madara said, but his tone was not as casual as he wanted. The children of the new generation are different. And this one has been spoiled beyond measure. You've spoiled her? Izuna logically assumed. It was surprisingly easy for him to imagine Madara indulging his granddaughter's whims, but even in his wildest fantasy it was impossible for the girl to be spoiled that much. Impossible, right? His tone took on a certain sarcasm. Who would have thought? You used to be rather awkward with children, you'd panic when they were handed to you, and your rudeness would constantly bring them to tears. Me too, but for the scale this has reached, thank our clanmates, Madara maintained an exaggerated calm. Although somewhere deep in his soul, it was pleasant to hear familiar mocking notes. Now they sounded in reality, and not in his memories. It's hard to believe, but it seems that the Uchiha have become much more careful with children since the conclusion of peace. They exchanged sarcastic phrases and witty remarks, but the crying in the background did not stop, sometimes getting louder, sometimes almost dying down. Izuna did not see, but Madara tried to keep an impassive expression on his face. But something was scratching inside. Crying, screaming, no one would be pleased to hear them, but the tears of his granddaughter made Madara remember things he would prefer to leave in the past. The first time they met. When every meeting ended with tears, crying, fear. Maybe we should leave earlier, his brother suggested, as if sensing his hesitation. Leave earlier. He needed to do it before he gave in to the pressure of excessive sensitivity and conscience. Costs. He had made difficult decisions many times in his life. So he couldn't back down from the right decision just because Izuna, the younger one, had this reaction? She might think he was angry with her now, she might be desperately jealous, but he couldn't. He couldn't? Why are you whining? Why did he decide to look in on her before leaving? Madara couldn't formulate the exact reason, since it was only in his feelings. He simply couldn't leave, leaving his crying granddaughter behind. Instead of answering, Izuna let out a heart-rending sob and looked at him with red eyes. All the whites of her eyes were now bright red, as were the girl's nose and cheeks. It was a disgusting sight. But for some reason it didn't make him feel disgusted. What difference does it make to you? Izuna sobbed heartbreakingly and demonstratively moved away from him, even though he was already standing on the threshold and did not enter her personal space. Go talk to Izuna-ji, he's older than me. Izuna, Madara sighed with resignation. The girl's resentment was obvious even before his arrival, but it was still unclear what could be done with her. He could explain in detail why he didn't want to take her, but in that case it would contradict his goal, to keep a small fry away from dangerous knowledge. It seemed that he would have to deal with this later. My brother and I are leaving. Be a good girl, don't burn down the house while we're gone. The man had already started to turn around when Izuna suddenly turned her head in his direction. I'll burn you, she said vindicatively, and when he froze, trying to comprehend how serious this statement was, she added sarcastically, that's a lame parting word, Madara-ji. It sounds exactly as if you usually don't leave me alone, and in fact, live with me. Go, walk with your eye Izuna-ji. Her voice began to tremble at the last words. Each word hit the nail on the head. Stupid accusations, but she did live alone. He would visit her occasionally, more often as time went on, but ultimately it was strange to worry about Izuna, because she didn't need adults to look after her. Of course, this subtle hint didn't cause his final decision, but it certainly contributed. "I'll take it if you promise to listen and not argue," Madara said after a couple of minutes of putting pressure on his conscience with tearful eyes and trembling lips. He wasn't going to take his granddaughter with him, so that she wouldn't even accidentally see what she wasn't supposed to see. However, leaving her now didn't seem like a good idea either. You never know, the house might actually burn down. Or something worse. "Grandpa," it sounded shocked. Something was squeezing in her chest. She hadn't called him that for a long time. Izuna smiled incessantly. She smiled endlessly, laughed at every little thing, squinted happily at the sun and glanced contentedly at the figures of her grandfathers walking forward. They took her with them. Even if it took a lot of crying, a lot of pushing on forbidden, or rather, simply undesirable and painful, topics, but still. Izuna was happy in her own way. She just didn't want to see any buts in this situation, even if there were plenty of them. For example, she had to swear to be obedient and not argue. It was a harsh condition, considering that arguing was part of her everyday life with Madara, and obedience. Ugh. Well, if it concerns Madara, then that's a completely different thing, right? Izuna never liked to listen to adults. It became clear pretty quickly that age was no guarantee of greater intelligence than children, but even if they were smarter than her, she simply didn't want to listen to them. But with her grandfather, everything was different. He wasn't always right, and it didn't seem to be because of his venerable age. He was just a grandfather, and that made being an obedient granddaughter especially pleasant. Being disobedient, however, was even more pleasant, but there should be variety in life. Judging by the situation, the debt for disobedience had accumulated to be quite a large one, since she had to be an obedient granddaughter for two grandfathers at once. The task was rather difficult for someone for whom pranks and bickering were a way of life, and not a rebellion, as it sometimes is, but I will try my best. Izuna became determined and quickened her pace. The obvious target of her obedience was Izuna-ji, as the one in greatest need. The obedience they had agreed upon with Madara-ji, after all, clearly implied not only obedience itself, but also care and all sorts of exemplary behavior. Izuna-ji, she began with inspiration. Madara-ji glanced at her with some apprehension. "Isn't it hard for you to walk?" Izuna-ji immediately stumbled, but regained his balance in time. "It's unusual, to be honest," the sofa laughed softly. "It's so strange," but as soon as Madara-ji stopped defending her, for some reason it wasn't him who became more charming in her eyes, but his brother. Or maybe it has to do with where they were going? Where they were going, Izuna didn't know, and, so she felt, she would never find out. The grandfathers had some secrets of their own that they didn't even think of letting her in on. If she wasn't satisfied with what they gave her, next time she wouldn't even know about the fact that there was a secret. But everything's fine. The poor sweet little sofa, blind and so constrained by the fact that he found himself in the future, evoked an endless desire to protect. "Maybe I should carry you?" Izuna offered, pitying him and willing to help in any way she could. The need for help became even more obvious when Izuna-ji finally fell. The fact that Madara-ji immediately after that called a halt, just glancing at the confused Sofu, brought bad thoughts. Izuna smiled. She smiled, and still tried not to think about the bad. So what if in the cases when she fell, Madara only swore and called a halt with caustic comments, and not so calmly only when she was completely unable to run? So what, right? It is natural. In the end, according to simple mathematics, Madara-ji should love Izuna 4 times more than her. Then Tessin. Izuna-chan seemed cheerful, joyful, and happy. Izuna couldn't see the smiles on her face, but he could clearly hear the quiet laughter that came from behind her at different times. He couldn't see what was making her so happy either. Not yet. The fact that the problem with her vision would soon be solved put him in a good mood, and the only one who didn't seem happy was Madara. Was it because he had to change his mind about Izuna-chan's participation in this expedition? Izuna thought. Even though he had a special affection for these two, his mind was cold. His brother had not changed so much that he became a stranger, but some changes only attracted attention with time. In general, Madara had become tougher, more serious. He still dreamed of peace, but he finally realized that it was simply impossible. Izuna felt that if he were not Madara's brother, a close and dear person, the fear towards him that lived inside would be much stronger. He would see only a person who was ready to kill everyone in his path. A path that leads to a goal incomprehensible to ordinary people. A cruel person. A monster. But it wasn't surprising, Madara was always like that, it just got worse with age. However, what caught my eye, the most. With him, Madara remained tough. With other people, Izuna was sure, he was a monster, the worst nightmare. However, as soon as his granddaughter appeared on the horizon, he liked Izuna-chan, maybe not as a shinobi, but as an unknown creature that made life easier and more pleasant. That was exactly what she felt like, a strange, uncharacteristic feeling for him. Izuna didn't say that he saw anything bad in this, although he could rationally come up with a ton of reasons why this would still come back to haunt Madara. And also a ton of reasons why Madara wouldn't care.